First of all, there's something very crucial we have to do. Show of hands. Who got the pun in the title? I'll have to work on that. So thank you for coming. So this will be about Orthodox Jews going to ayahuasca ceremonies and what happens there. First of all, it's like a project with a lot of people involved, and I'm just a little master's student in religious studies. So just to give some credit to the other guys as well. This will be in 3 parts. First, I'll talk about ayahuasca and Haredi people or Ultra-Orthodox Jews, which, of course, a few minutes about each will not be enough to actually explain the whole thing, but hopefully you will get the sense of what's interesting about when these 2 worlds meet and why it's also a little weird. And then we'll see what happens when they meet. So ayahuasca, like the simple explanation, is a brew made from those 2 plants. If you want to make it complicated, sometimes the psychotrope is switched out for diplopteris, and different traditions also add other admixtures, but that's like the basic thing. Visionary brew come from the Amazonas, from the Amazon. And actually ayahuasca is just the name in Quechua language, but there are dozens of indigenous groups in the Amazon who use ayahuasca, so it has a lot of other names. And it's really hard to determine how long has it been used. The estimations range from several hundreds to several thousands of years. The earliest written records we have are from Spanish missionaries around the 17th century, reporting the existence of ayahuasca traditions. And this, for example, is traditional Shipibo art, a tribe from Peru, which is kind of art inspired by ayahuasca visions, just for some flavor. So ayahuasca is really interwoven into the local culture in the Amazon, into the mythology for some groups. That the myths about the creation of the universe are also the myths about the creation of ayahuasca. So it's really interwoven into the culture. And it's not perceived as just some kind of brew or mind-altering substance. It's perceived as a kind of entity, a divine being even, that by drinking the brew, contact can be made with it, and also contact can be made with other entities. And an important thing about ayahuasca in the Amazon is that it's not just used for healing, it's used for lots of purposes: sorcery, divination, decision-making for the community, and other purposes. And again, for some flavor, this is art by Pablo Amaringo, who was a shaman, or maybe more precisely, ayahuasquero or curandero, who is also famous for his art representing ayahuasca visions. So a few words about what a traditional ayahuasca ceremony looks like. Again, there are dozens of groups, so there's lots of different traditions, but there are some general things we can say. That's how ChatGPT imagines an ayahuasca ceremony. So one important thing about ayahuasca ceremonies, which I think is important in the context of this talk, is that a central thing is a kind of prayer songs called Icaros, which are songs that are sung by the facilitator, the shaman, the ayahuasquero, whatever you choose to call it, to guide ayahuasca, to guide the spirit itself. So there are different Icaros for different purposes, for different situations. And it's a central part in how traditionally ayahuasca is worked with. And as far as the experience goes, probably at least some of you know anyway, but ayahuasca is considered a very intense, but also very varied, like very different experiences. For example, death rebirth is very common, contact with and conversation with ayahuasca or other entities is also very common. and intricate visions and more and more. And just a shout out for probably the most comprehensive study of the phenomenology of ayahuasca was done by Danny Shannon, who died recently, and this book is still really really good, and there's nothing parallel to it yet. So, how did it come from the Amazon here to the West? So it's hard to say, but probably a big role was played by ayahuasca churches during the mostly first half of the 20th century. Several churches in the Amazon area emerged, which combine Christianity with ayahuasca, with Afro-Brazilian beliefs and traditions like Santo Daime, which this is how Santo Daime ayahuasca ritual looks like, a little different. So they emerged, established around the first half of the 20th century. Around the second half, they started to spread more around the world. And at the same time, interest in ayahuasca increased. And ayahuasca reached Israel around the early 2000s. And now let's talk about the other part, and we'll go back to ayahuasca in Israel in a moment. When I give this talk in Israel, I just show this image and everyone knows what I'm talking about. I suppose that's not the situation here. So let's try to give some kind of sense about what is this community, the Haredi, the Ultra-Orthodox. So first of all, the Haredim, it's a branch of Judaism that's often referred as Ultra-Orthodox. It's developed around the end of the 19th century as a kind of reaction to modernization and secularization. And it actually, in the heart of it is the belief that they were afraid with modernization, etc., that the Jewish tradition, which was being kept alive for 2,000 years in the diaspora, will disappear, will dissolve. And so they see themselves as the custodians, the guardians of this 1,000-year-old tradition. And for this reason, it's a community that's very, very conservative, very wary of outside influences, very reluctant of cooperating also with the state, for example, and other outside communities and societies. And having said that, it's also composed of lots of groups and subgroups, over 100 in Israel alone, and they're about 12% of Israel's population. And just to give you a sense of the lifestyle of why they're also called Ultra-Orthodox, just a few details. So the big thing is their life revolves around the strict adherence to halacha, which is the Jewish law, and what is called the mitzvot, which is 613 commandments, which are things that Jews are supposed to do. And from the halacha and the commandments, there's like a whole world of how they should live or not live their lives, which includes things like really strict dress code for men, for women, both, strict segregation between men and women in education, at work, even in some places in buses, public transportation, segregation from general society. As I say, they're quite reluctant about cooperating with society, so they have their own education system, their own media, usually their own cities, etc. Haredi men specifically, a lot of them dedicate their life to Torah study, which is part of how this branch, how this tradition works. And for that reason, close to 50% of Haredi men in Israel are unemployed. And just to say that there's also, except Israel, there's also a big Haredi community in the US, which we're also studying, but this does not refer to them in any way. They're a whole different world. So here specifically, I'm talking just about what goes on in Israel. So it's kind of weird that something so conservative, so closed up, this kind of people go and drink ayahuasca. So let's see what happens there, why. But first, a few words about the study. Those are just preliminary findings, so there'll be more in the future. I'll be presenting a thematic analysis based on semi-structured interviews. We've had 11 participants so far. 9 of them were male, 2 were female. And the ages were between 21 and 60. The average was 38. Anyway, now we can move on to the good stuff, right? So what do Haredi ceremonies in Israel look like? Because clearly they must look different from the Amazon, right? So they take traditional Icaros, sometimes songs in Portuguese, Spanish, local Amazon languages, but they also combine Jewish Hebrew songs and prayers. They usually include both men and women in the same ceremonies. There are sometimes segregated ceremonies with just men or just women, but usually it's not the case. And they're rarely exclusively Haredi. Like, there are some few ceremonies which are just for Haredi people, but most of them are mixed with people who are ex-Haredi or secular or, God forbid, hippies. And while some of them are led by a rabbi, most of them are led by secular shamans, facilitators, whatever you choose to call them. So already it's a kind of a mix between the classic traditional ceremonies and Jewish tradition and something in between that kind of merges and blends the edges of them. So why do they even drink ayahuasca? We've mostly got 2 answers for these questions. For this question, one of them is to heal trauma and psychological distress, and the other one is to enrich Jewish spiritual life. And because what interests me is religion, so I will exclusively be focusing on the second part. But then the question is, does the spiritual life even need enrichment? And we've got some answers on that. For example, the Haredi experience today is very technocratic. We know there is a God, we know there are higher realms, but it's very just in the background, and that's all. The deeds are very dry. Studying the Torah is very dry, very technocratic, legalistic even. The involvement with the halacha, the Jewish law, is also very legalistic and technocratic. And one more, it really completes the religious experience, since without it, the spiritual characteristic just feels empty and pointless. I look at Haredi people who keep the religion without ayahuasca, and I don't understand what motivates them to do it. It seems so poor to me. And there's something to be said about this, because those kind of things are very, very controversial in the Haredi community, because the core belief of that kind of community is that Judaism is already perfect, it's already complete, it doesn't need anything else. So maybe those are things that we heard from several of the subject in our study, but it's not something they would probably say out loud in the community. So just keep that in mind. So how does it enrich religious life? A lot of ways. I tried to narrow it down to 3, which is a connection to deeper understanding of Judaism and Jewish scripture, deepening of prayer, and a deeper relationship with God. So let's see some quotes about these 3. Suddenly, I felt a connection to our tradition. I realized the tradition that we know from our lives as Jews in 2024, from the depth of the Galut, the diaspora. It is a tradition that comes from very enlightened periods where this experience of love and connection to God were natural. All kinds of things that I've studied before, suddenly I experienced them. All the things we knew, we believed, but we didn't really believe. I shouted, I didn't really believe. I shouted it there at the ceremony. A couple more. Things that I may have learned in the past, but I didn't understand what I learned. I didn't internalize them. It was distant. I had no idea, Kabbalistic, legalistic, Hasidic ideas, suddenly they became a part of me. I know a lot of Haredi people that are spiritual seekers or ex-Orthodox Jews. When they come to these ceremonies, something reconnects them from a new place. Some understand that we're a tradition, that we're a dynasty. So it's something that here speaks about Judaism, but maybe some of you know it from other places. Personally, as a practicing Buddhist, for me, the first time I took psychedelics was experience of, oh, all those complex concepts. Now I experience them and I can internalize them and understand them better. So it's that with Judaism. A few on deepening of prayer. Since Ayahuasca, my Shabbat is a whole different matter. Especially Shabbat Eve, which is a time of incredible spiritual transcendence. I can really experience semi-psychedelic experiences at Kabbalat Shabbat, which is kind of a ritual of welcoming the Shabbat on Friday evening. I just stand there at the temple and I see the orot, the lights of Shabbat go up and down. That's not under the influence of anything. Nowadays, when I pray, a lot of religious experiences that were much emptier before, now they receive validation and content from the realms of ayahuasca. I never prayed before. I've never prayed before. This is the real prayer. So this comes back to the reasons of why does their spiritual life even need enrichment? Because there's some kind of sense, something about the current way Haredi people live their religious lives can feel sometimes dry and empty, and like they're just doing the prayers when they have to pray and they do the commandments when they need to do them, etc. But they also report some kind of dryness. And then suddenly after drinking ayahuasca, even if it was just once, for a while after, they feel like their prayer, their regular Jewish prayer, they didn't change anything functionally. They're doing the same thing, but their experience becomes much deeper. And of course, some about the relationship with God. Now I understand that mitzvot, the commandments, are a simulation. It comes straight from God. He comes and tells you, listen, this thing you put tefillin, it's a kind of leather strap that Jews put around their hand in the mornings and pray. You put tefillin and it simulates a certain connection with me, with God. I had a deep journey, very, very deep. And I started to understand in a whole new way, what is God? And what does he even want? What is this whole thing? He didn't say, what is this whole thing? My relationship with God, with the Creator, or whatever I call it, it's on a daily basis. Even though you can't speak about what is the Creator and how is the connection, but yes, it is a connection on a daily basis. Couple more. I had more understanding of what God is. I used to think, like I was taught as a child, that it's something external. Now I understand it's something internal, something that connects all the people in the world and that I'm part of. I have part of God inside me. It's a big responsibility. It's also good to know that I have this inside of me, that I'm a part of something larger than me. And that's, the last quote is what someone said about the facilitator, about the rabbi leading the ceremony. What he does in those ceremonies is starting to create a space where we can feel, not just read, what is the state of Geulah, redemption? What is Todat Mikdash, temple consciousness? What does a connection with God mean, a living, breathing connection? Also, they report different understanding of what God is. Some say, I realized God is love, I realized God is unity, I realized God is nature. But the important thing is, even though they maybe call it different names, most of them report suddenly they have a kind of relationship with God that they didn't have before. But there's also some conflicts around it, some complications, if you will. First of all, inside the Haredi community, the use of drugs is very unacceptable, and ayahuasca is just considered a drug. Don't really tell between ayahuasca or heroin. So many of them feel like they have to hide it in fear of that their surroundings will not understand. And there are kind of questions regarding the Jewish law, like are ceremonies with both men and women even allowed? There's is it even allowed? Usually it's not allowed for Haredi men to hear women singing. And usually in ceremonies, women sing. So is it allowed? Is it not allowed? Are, are those ceremonies considered idolatry? If the facilitator, even if he's a rabbi, if he sings a song to ayahuasca or to some spirits or to Pachamama, is it considered idolatry in Jewish terms? Yes or no? Does ayahuasca increase or decrease observance? Because some people report that from this new relationship to God, they also feel a new relationship with the Jewish law, with the commandments. And then if they're less strict about it, what does it mean? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? So those are just some of the conflicts. Just to complicate the picture about it, it's not just they go there and they have those experiences that are cool, and then prayer is better and the relationship with God, etc. It's also complicated. It's not simple for them. And why is this interesting? Because whenever I tell people about what I'm studying, it's either, wow, that's so cool, or what, that's like so niche. So I think that psychedelics use it, I think we've heard it several times during this conference, at least I did. So it's been shown that psychedelics tend to change metaphysical beliefs, but there's very little study done about religious people who use psychedelics regularly and what it does to their beliefs and their practices and their metaphysical beliefs. And my personal belief, and which is what brought me to this, is that as psychedelics become more widespread, as the psychedelic renaissance becomes bigger, so perhaps there will be larger implications, cultural implications about how we see religion, how we see spirituality. And I think it's important and interesting to see how it affects people who are already deeply religious and they use psychedelics, especially in a ceremonial setting like ayahuasca. So just to summarize, so that you can actually ask questions, that could be cool. The participation of Haredi people in ayahuasca ceremony seems to be a rapidly growing phenomenon in Israel and especially in the US, which did not mention at this point. And they report that it enriches their spiritual and religious lives and creates new relationship with old customs. They don't really change their way of life, but they find new meaning, new relationship with the customs and the traditions that they had before. And a reminder, those are just preliminary results, and I don't know, talk to you in 2 years or something. So thank you very much.